All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been preparing a series of videos based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I'm in the third part, which is on CSS, and I'm in the last module in CSS, that being in CSS layout. And it's time to go through our introduction on CSS layout. And as it says, this article will recap some of the CSS layout features that have been touched upon in previous modules. All right. Plus, it'll start to introduce some of the new concepts that we'll be, covering as we go on. So you can see the list here. And they mention that these allow us to take elements in a web page and control where they are positioned relative to their default position. Now, the default position is the normal flow, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. All right. But you've got control, basically, once you start to harness all this stuff, over where you want to put almost anything on a page. All right. As it says, each technique here, and I'm not going to read them. These are the next sections that we're going to be going over. All right. They'll give you a little bit of a very little bit of an intro to each section. But you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different things that we're going to talk about. And it's not that each one of these is used in a vacuum. In other words, it's not that you can't pick and choose and do some combinations of both. And as they mentioned there, each technique has its uses, advantages, and disadvantages. And none of these is designed to be used basically, again, all by itself. So the first, as mentioned there, is normal flow. And notice that's when you do nothing, basically. It's how the browser lays out HTML pages by default when you do nothing to control layout. So when you look here, if we had this, we should have a paragraph. That paragraph should be followed by an unordered list followed by another paragraph. And you can see, as they say, this is exactly how it's displayed. The other thing, too, is if we put no CSS in here, as far as how this is displayed, it's going to depend. It could look different on different browsers. And I do want to show you what I mean here. So I'm grabbing that. And I'm going to come in here. And we have been using that download file. So let me grab that one. And let me open it up. And again, just so you know, yes, I am using Notepad++ here just because it tends to resonate better. But in the actual development work we'll be doing in class, we will continue to use VS Code. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this community college thing. And this. I'm not going to have any styling in here whatsoever right now, so I'll just leave empty style tags in here. It doesn't hurt anything. And let's get rid of everything that's in the body section. Again, this was from that exercise that we did earlier. So that's pretty simple. Again, a paragraph followed by an unordered list followed by a paragraph. All right, so let's save that. And I'm going to bring it up in 2 different browsers. All right, so there's the download, and I'm just going to click open, and there it is. All right, nothing big, but I'm going to copy this, and now I'm going to come up and open up Firefox. And in Firefox here, I'm going to bring up the same file. All right, and I'm going to make this a little bigger here. And I'm also going to do the same thing here. Try to make them about the same size. I think that's pretty good. And what you should notice is they look almost identical. And you might think, yeah, they do look exactly identical. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the point of showing you this is each browser puts their own defaults in if you put in no CSS. All right. So the amount of padding, margin that's in here, etc. All right. The way that these are displayed, etc., is pretty much, at least part of it is going to be, for lack of better words, almost browser specific when you use the normal flow. So when you don't put anything else extra in there. So it says, note here how the HTML is displayed in the exact order in which it appears in the source code, because that's what we've told it. We've told it to do nothing special. The elements that appear below the other are described as block elements. Why? Because paragraphs and unordered lists, ordered lists, etc., they're all block elements. That's why we have the blank line after them, because they're displayed in a block. The direction in which these elements are laid out, as it says, is described as the block direction. It runs vertically when you're using a language like English. All right. Why? Because, as it says, we have a vertical writing mode. We go from left to right. It would run horizontally with a language like Japanese that, instead of having a horizontal writing mode like we have, has a vertical writing mode. Hopefully I didn't say it wrong the first time. All right. For many of the elements on your page, the normal flow will create exactly what you need. However, for more complex layout, you'll need to alter this behavior. That should make sense. The methods that you can use to start changing this, all right, are shown here. So next is the display property. Notice standard values like display block, display inline, or display inline block can change how elements behave in the normal flow. There's also entire layout methods that we'll look at, including grid and flexbox. Now, as I mentioned to you previously, in the olden days, up until a few years ago, basically floats were the things that were applied. As it says, to cause block level elements to wrap along one side of an element. So if you wanted text to flow around an image type of thing. All right. And it's important to go over those because they're still used on a lot. Maybe not so much in new development, but they're still used a lot in existing development. The position property, as it says, it allows you to precisely control the placement of boxes inside of other boxes. So we'll look at things like static positioning, which is the default. I believe in there they'll probably get into relative positioning and absolute positioning as well. Table layout, as it says, features designed for styling the parts of an HTML table that can be used on non-table elements. And finally, multi-column layouts. Some of that is easy, fairly easy. Some of it can be more complex. So again, with this display property, as it says, the main methods of achieving page layout are all the values of the display property, which is used to change the way things are done normally. In other words, default. In other words, unless told otherwise. All right, and it gives some examples. It says the fact that the paragraphs in English display are one below the other is due to the fact that they're styled that way. All right, with display block. It says there if you create a link around some text inside of a paragraph, that link remains inside because the link is an inline element. If it wasn't, every time you would have a hyperlink, it would basically give a line break in there, and that would not look very good. Typically, it wouldn't, at least. But as mentioned, you can change this default behavior. For example, it says the li element is display block by default. And you're going to see that when we have our unordered list of elements, when we go in to create our menu. Okay, and if you want the menu, which is to be horizontal rather than vertical, which is pretty much in vogue today, you can change the display type to inline. So instead of doing a display block, you'll do a display inline. And it says the fact that you can change the value of display for any element means you can pick the HTML elements for their semantic meaning without being concerned with how they look. because you are in control. In addition to being able to change the default presentation, it says there are some bigger layout methods. When you use these, it said you will need generally to invoke additional properties. The two most important ones for us to look at will be flex, which is really called flex box typically, and grid, which is typically referred to as CSS grid. Now, as mentioned here, Flexbox is the short name for flexible box layout, designed to make it easy for us to lay out things in one dimension, either as a row or as a column. Now that said, and I've said this before, and I will say this again, and that is, designed to make it easy. Well, that's relative. In other words, it might be easy to somebody who's got a lot of experience with this, and it might not be easy as you're learning it. All right, clock's going off here, so let me stop for a sec. All right, now I was just thinking about this too, that one thing to realize about this is there is so much information here that the idea right here shouldn't be that you memorize everything, but when there's something you don't remember how to do, that you pretty much know where to go to look it up. All right, so as it says here, to use Flexbox, you apply display flex to the parent element that you want to lay out and have the children be flexed. It says we can see in this simple example, it says the markup gives us a containing element with a class of wrapper. You'll know that you can notice that wrapper is flexed. All right, inside of the document, we're going to have 3 divs. In fact, we're going to have 4 divs, an outside wrapper div, and inside 3 box divs. All right, and it says by default these would display as block elements below one another in our English language document. Well, let's look at that. All right, forget about this for a second. Let's look at this the way that we have been doing things. All right, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get rid of everything we had in here previously, and I'm going to replace it with this. So again, I'm going in and I've got an outer div, and inside that outer div, I've got 3 inner divs. I'm going to save that. All right, so when I save that with absolutely no CSS in there, as you can see, and I go in and I run this, you shouldn't be that surprised to see 1, 2, and 3 right here. I mean, like I said, that shouldn't be a surprise. All right, now let's go in and make that one change that they show here, and that is to come in and in our CSS say that we want the wrapper to be display flex. So we come in here, that just says again, if we've got a class called wrapper, it should be displayed flex. So save that, come back to here where we just were, and let's refresh. Note the difference. Very simply, what we've done by just saying display flex, we've done no other formatting of this, but we have turned it from a vertical list, which was 3 lines long, to a horizontal list, which is 1 line long. All right, by just adding that CSS in here. Now theirs looks different. Okay, because they've done, whether they admit it or not here, they've done more CSS than the little bit that I've shown. All right, and it says there, in addition to the above properties that can be displayed, there are properties that can be applied to the flex items themselves. All right, it says these properties, among other things, can change the way that the items flex. In other words, do you want them to go left to right, right to left? You can make them go up and down, etc. It says, as an example of this, we can add the flex property to all of our child items with a value of 1, which will cause all of them to grow and fill the container rather than leaving space at the end. So right now, basically what this is doing is it's just using the area that it needs to display things. And there's a big blank area in here. But let's go in, as they mention here, and let's add this. All right. So this says it will cause all of the items to grow and fill the container rather than leaving space at the end. So this says all divs that are under wrapper should have a flex value of 1, which means they should take up as much space as they possibly can. All right, so let's grab that. We will put that in here underneath what we currently have. Save. Go back and refresh our page, and let's see how this changes. All right, now it's got them laid out. So this first one is taking up this much. This second one, well, I should say this much. The second one is taking up this much. And the third is taking up this much. All right. So in other words, by giving each one of them a value of 1, since there are 3 of them, they're each taking up 1/3 of the screen space. And as you'd probably guess, if I come back in here and I add another box and I call that 4, all right, and I come back in here, now you'll notice they're each taking up 1, 2, 3, 1/4. Or if I come back in here and I'll remove that one that I just put in, and I will take the box 3, and for now, just temporarily, I will comment out that line. And probably you've already figured out what will happen. And that is now each one of them is taking up half. All right. So hopefully, at least, you start to see what can be the real power of using these things. So it's back to the way it was. All right. Now, I don't want to waste too much time here. All right. But before we go into grid, I'm already at 17 minutes, so I'm going to stop. But it says, this has been a very short introduction to what is possible in Flexbox. To see more, look at our Flexbox article. Well, I believe that's the one that we're going to cover later. And when we do this, take my word for it, we'll do it nice and slow. My plan is to finish this section, and then before we go on to the JavaScript portion, to go in and actually start creating a website using some of the stuff that we've been talking about. All right. So before we go into grid layout, which is next, let's stop right here and we'll start part 2 with the grid layout.